Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, we are discussing post-Mauryan period, and so far we have discussed the political process, political history of post-Mauryan times, and also we discussed in detail the economy, what were the agriculture activity, what were the trade and coinage systems. We try to understand in detail, and now we move further and we'll try to understand society and religion of the time. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio the same resource person, Dr. O.P. Singh. He teaches history in Delhi College of Arts and Commerce in Delhi University, and his specialization is ancient India. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this topic, and we'll also request him to suggest some books which will be helpful for our students for further reading of the post-Mauryan economy, society, and political history. So on your behalf, I welcome him for the EduSet lecture. Welcome.
Thank you, Narendraji, and good afternoon, viewers. Now, we have already discussed so far the political history of the period, the economic activities including agriculture, arts and crafts, trade and commerce. Now, today we have to discuss a very interesting topic of this portion of history, and that is society and religion. Now, friends, society and religion does not emerge in vacuum. These are byproducts of various forces interacting in time from political perspective as well as economic perspective. Now, we have already seen that the economy of this period was flourishing. Agriculture was quite intensive. It was leading to development in arts and crafts, and that was further leading to increase in trade and commerce. So, this improvement in economic condition, which was far superior than previous times, made this economy complex, and this complexity in economy is also reflected in society and ultimately in religion that we have to discuss today. Now, if we look at contemporary sources, the Brahmanical literature, that is the most important literature, of course, apart from Buddhist literature for this time, the Brahmanical literature presents a picture of general decay and dissolution, and sometimes there is an attempt to project this period as a period of social crisis through the Kali Age crisis. So, on the part of Brahmanas, who were the lawgivers of the society, there is an attempt to maintain the traditional social order and maintain the social balance in the society. Now, if we look at the social structure of post-Mauryan times, the society remained Varna-based. Our society has been a Varna-based society. At the top of this Varna hierarchy was the Brahman, followed by Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, and then Sudras. So, this there is an attempt on the part of the lawgivers to maintain the Varna order, and while maintaining this Varna order, there is an attempt to suggest, rather there is a forceful attempt to suggest that every section of the society should stick to its duties and rights. Now, if we talk about the Brahmanas, which was the most privileged section of the society, the immunities and the rights, the privileges of the Brahmanas, of the people belonging to Brahmana Varga, they are again reiterated. However, find that if somebody commits an offense against a Brahmin, then he was to be punished with more severity as against an offense for some other Varna. Now, Kshatriyas, they were assigned the same old duty of ruling and fighting, and Vaishyas were assigned the duty of agriculture. Vaisyas have since earliest times been assigned the duty of production. During this time too, they were assigned the duty of trade and agriculture. that is production, and they were expected to maintain the entire society. But there is a very interesting shift in the duties of Vaisyas during this period, because it is suggested that sometimes even the Vaisyas could take up to arms, and they were entitled in fact to take up arms, especially in self-defense. If somebody attacks a Vaisya was allowed to take up arms in self-defense. Then a Vaisya was also allowed to take up arms in defense of a cow, if somebody is trying to hurt cow, or even a Brahmin. So in such situations, Vaisyas were expected to take up arms, though the taking up of arm was socially the duty and responsibility of a Kshatriya. But there is one more interesting aspect to this taking up of arm by the Vaisyas, and that is they were allowed to take up arms to prevent intermixture of Varnas. Now, intermixture of Varnas seems to have become a very severe problem of the times, in which people of different Varnas were marrying each other, because traditionally and socially it was only allowed for a boy of a particular Varna to marry a girl of the same Varna. But there were evidence of digression of this Varna boundary, and in such a situation it was creating social problem in the society. So a Vaisya was also expected to take up arms to prevent this intermixture of Varna. Now the Sudras, according to Manu, were supposed to serve the upper classes. This is a traditional work that was assigned to them. They were in fact supposed to serve all the three upper classes, and especially the Brahmanas. But here too we find an interesting shift in the stand of the lawgivers, where they suggest that in the time of distress, a Sudra is allowed to live by practicing various arts and crafts. Now, if we look slightly earlier in history, we have already seen that the Sudras were allowed to take up agriculture. Kautilya during Mauryan times had allowed Sudras to take up agriculture, and in fact several new settlements were started by bringing the Sudra settlers from different areas. So this was because of extension of agricultural area, and the state was concerned for it. So Sudras were already inducted into agriculture, but now here you find that Sudras in times of distress they can take up to various arts and crafts. Now in times of distress there is a general rule also, and this is called Apad Dharma, the religion that has to be followed during emergency. In Apad Dharma, person of a particular Varna can take up the duties or can take up the jobs of a different Varna to sustain himself or herself. But this was not a norm. It was an emergency measure just to sustain oneself, and it was applicable to Brahmanas as well. Brahmanas too were supposed to take up to other professions in times of distress. Otherwise, Brahmanas were expected to live only by reading, teaching and performing sacrifices and nothing else. Now, coming down to the Sudras issue again, as we have said that Manu has suggested that they are supposed to serve the upper Varnas and especially the Brahmanas. Now, there is a tremendous increase in the number of mixed castes. Mixed caste, that is the outcome of intermixture of Varna that we saw right now, ultimately was leading in increase of mixed castes. And this increase in the number of mixed castes was basically because of Anulom and Pratilom marriages. Now, there are various types of marriages prescribed in our ancient literature, but during this period we have this particular system, particular methodology adopted to accommodate various people of intervern relationship. Now, here we have Anulom marriage and Pratilom marriage. Anulom marriage was basically a marriage in which a boy of upper Varna marries a girl of a lower Varna. And Pratilom marriage is a marriage in which the girl of upper Varna marries the boy of a lower Varna. Now, needless to say, Anulom marriage was less blamable than Pratilom marriage. And Manu says that the children of Anulom unions or Anulom marriages, they were allowed to, rather they were entitled to the rituals of upper caste. They were slightly lower in Varna to their father. The children of Anulom marriages did not belong to the Varna of father, but they were slightly lower to the Varna of their father. Whereas in Pratilom marriages, the child was in fact a mixed caste, a Varna Sankar, and accommodated in the society as a Varna Sankar. So now, whatever the reason, the fact is that several such marriages were taking place by digression of the Varna order. People of different Varna were marrying very amongst each other and not in the same Varna, and there was a problem before the lawgivers of the society that how to accommodate the progeny of such unions in the society, because a Brahmin was only a Brahmin if he was born of a Brahmin father and Brahmin mother. Similarly, a Kshatriya was only a Kshatriya if he was born of a Kshatriya father and Kshatriya mother. But what will be the status of a boy who was born of a Brahmin father and Kshatriya mother? Now here this was accommodated in the society as Sut, and the most important example of such a union is Karna, who was known as Sutputra also. Now they were the people who were highly placed in the society. They were not accommodated in the society at par with all the Varnas, but they were upper in the society. But the worst form of marriage was Pratilom marriage, where a Brahmin girl married a Sudra boy. Now, needless to say, the progeny of such unions, the children of such marriages, were lowest in the social order, and so many permutations and combinations can be worked out, and one can find that different types of marriages, different types of social orders were being created within the broader framework of Varna Sankar to accommodate such people. Now, Chandal is the section of the society that holds the lowest position in the society, because a Chandal was the progeny of a Brahmin mother and Sudra father. Other outcast groups were hunters, fishermen, butchers, executioners, sweepers, and basket makers, and also those who sold liquors. So such people, they were not allowed to live within the boundary of the villages. They were supposed to live outside the boundary of the villages, and whenever they had to come inside the village, they were supposed to make some sound so that the people leave the roads for them, so that they are not polluted by the shadow of such people. The point is that this is a group of people who emerged in the society because of inter-Varna marriages that were taking place in the society, and these people in fact ultimately became a part of various craft groups over a period of time, as we shall see. Now, another interesting feature of this society was that when all such people were placed in outcast category, especially the progenies of Pratilom marriages. But a very interesting feature of this society is that foreigners were placed in the same outcast category, though they were not treated with such humiliation. Now, it's quite obvious that it was not possible to treat the foreigners with the same humiliation with which a Sudra of Indian society or outcasts of Indian society were treated. So, nevertheless, there was a new element in the society, and that was of foreigners. But even among the Indian social elements, there is an increase in the number of mixed castes or Varna Sankar. Now, as we said in the beginning, that the contemporary Brahmanical literature portrays this period as a period of social crisis, and similarly, there is an attempt by the lawgivers to control this crisis by forcibly applying the laws that was applicable to various social groups. So, if you look at Manu Smriti, Manu lays down several laws which affected the position of Sudras very adversely. Now, if we believe Manu, he says that the very limb with which a man of a low caste or low varna hurts a member of the highest caste was to be cut off. It was not applicable vice versa, but it was only applicable to the Sudras. He also says that if a Sudra insulted a twice born is a Brahmin or a Kshatriya. So, if a Sudra insults a twice born with gross invectives, his tongue would be chopped off. Now, such restrictions, especially against the Sudras, is seen in contemporary literature and especially in Manu Smriti. That is a very significant feature of the society of post-Mauryan times. Now, there was expansion in trade, we have already seen, and expansion in trade because of increase in art and artisanal activity, art and craft activity. Increase in trade was also creating more employment opportunities, more job opportunities, and the people of mixed caste, again if we believe Manu, Manu says that the artisans were mostly the people of mixed classes who were given the status of the Sudra. Now, they were basically, apart from the sections of the society which came out because of Pratilom marriage, Anulom and Pratilom marriage, they were also older tribes and various occupational groups who were assimilated in the Varna structure, and this Varna structure, though it was very rigid, but it had to accommodate such people because there was no other alternative before the lawgivers of the society. It was not possible to annihilate such groups from the society, so they had to be accommodated in the society. And as Manu says that they were accommodated as Sudras. So this is a process of assimilation of various castes, groups, because of so many reasons. We cannot explain the entire process of caste formation at this point of time, but these people were assimilated in the Indian society in Varna order. And what is more interesting to see, that this assimilation was a continuous process. This is obvious from the contemporary literature, wherein in Gautam Dharma Shastra we have Gautam Dharma Shastra talks about the existence of 11 mixed castes. Mahayan mentions 14 and Manu mentions as many as 60 mixed castes. So what you find that the number of mixed castes was increasing very rapidly over a period of time, and this was because of Anulom and Pratilom marriages. This was because of inclusion of various tribal groups in the Indian society and placing them into the Varna order and things like that. Then if we look at the contemporary artisans and craftsmen, we find that most of them have donated very generously to Buddhist and Jain monks, very rarely to any Brahmanical institution, but they have mostly donated to Buddhist and Jain monks. Now, the reason for it is different, that again cannot be discussed here. But what is important, that they were donating generously, that means that their economic condition was improving. They were already associated with agriculture since Mauryan times. Now they were also associated with art and craft. So their economic condition was improving, but their social position was not improving. Socially, they remain at the same place where they were centuries ago. So all this was leading to discontent among them, and it is not unlikely that they often turned against Brahmanas and even against Kshatriyas, leading to tension in the society. However, reference of such confrontation between the lower Varnas and upper Varnas do not find any mention in contemporary literature or in literature so far, but such a possibility cannot be ignored altogether. And this is reflected in some other ways, wherein, especially in the Puranas, there is a reference of a social crisis that is called Kali Yuga crisis, Kali age crisis, or Kali Yuga Sankat. Now, what is this crisis basically? It is projected that the people who are supposed to perform particular duties are not performing. That means the Vaishyas are expected to pay taxes, they are not paying taxes. The Sudras are expected to serve, they are not serving. So this was leading into problem for the rulers as well as lawgivers in smooth functioning of the society and the state system. And this has been projected in the contemporary literature as Kali age crisis. So basically it seems that during this period, the institutions of family, private property, Varna system, these were very important institutions of the society, all such institutions were being attacked. Then during Post Mauryan society, a new element in the society, as we discussed earlier, was the entry of foreigners. We have already seen it in our first lecture while we were discussing the political history of the period, that after the decline of the Mauryas, a number of foreigners or foreign groups entered India from northwest, and they were in possession, they were ruling people for very long period, and thus they were a new element in the Indian society. Now once they came, they were called Yavan. First of all, in earliest literature, the foreigners were called Yavan. But Yavan was a term that was actually used to denote Ionian Greeks. However, gradually over a period of time, it came to include all the social groups, all the group of people coming from Mediterranean region. Now, the presence of foreigners who had already achieved political and economic importance in Indian society it was posing a threat to the existing caste system or existing Varna system. It was a problem before the lawgivers that how to accommodate in the society, because they were not here to go back. They had come here, they had settled here, they were the rulers over here, and they planned to stay here. So it was a problem before the Brahmanas that how to accommodate these people in Indian Varna order, traditional Varna order. They were not allowed because the Brahmanas were lawgivers and they made the laws and they considered themselves to be the most superior. They were not willing to give them the status of Brahmanas to them. Similarly, there has been a long alliance between Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. So even Kshatriyas were not allowing Brahmanas to accord them the status of Kshatriyas. Though, as we have seen earlier, that they gave them the status of Shudras, but it was not possible to outrightly dub them as outcasts, because it was a very powerful group. It was not only powerful, but it was also the ruling section of the society. So in such a situation, because Brahmanas did not perform any manual job themselves, they were dependent on the rulers. In such a situation, Brahmanas had to come to terms with the foreigners, and that is why they tried to accommodate this foreign element in Indian society in a number of ways. So if we look at the attempts of the Brahmanical lawgivers to accommodate the foreigners in Indian society, what we find that though they have been accorded a status in the Varna structure, this status is marked by various contradictions. Because if we look at the literature of about first half of first millennium BC, they were basically treated on the basis of language. Language means all the area where a foreign language was spoken, a language other than Sanskrit and even probably Prakrit was spoken, all the area was called Mlech Desh. The people were Mlech Bhasa or Mlech language, outcast. Mlech is basically outcast. An outcast language is spoken, so the people speaking, all the people speaking Mlech Bhasa were Mlechas, that they were outcast. Now this is the stand that the Brahmanical literature shows sometimes during first half of the first millennium BC. But as they got economic status, as they got political power, as the number of Yavanas in Indian society increased, there is another attempt to provide them a place in Varna status or Varna structure. For example, Gautam Dharma Sutra says that the foreigners, Yavanas, they were progeny of Kshatriya men and Sudra women. This is a concocted fabrication, is an attempt to provide them a status in the society not equal to Kshatriyas and better than Sudras. So Gautam says that they are progeny of, they are children of Kshatriya father and Sudra women. But by the time of Mahabharata, we find that there is an attempt to trace for them an indigenous origin, because in Mahabharata they are said to be sons of Yayati. The foreigners are described to be sons of Yayati. Yayati was one of the rulers who fought on the side of Kauravas, perhaps in the war of Mahabharata. But nevertheless, here the Yavanas are projected as children of an indigenous tribe. Now, here what happens, that elsewhere in the Mahabharata we find that they were degraded as Sudras also. At one place in Mahabharata they are called sons of Jayati, but elsewhere in Mahabharata itself they are degraded as Sudras. And if we look at Manu, Manu calls them Vrat Kshatriyas at one place. Vrat Kshatriyas, that means Kshatriyas who have fallen from grace. They are not equivalent to Kshatriyas, they were slightly lower than Kshatriyas. But at the same time, Manu at a different place calls them Dasyu or demons. So it is very interesting to see the contradictory situation in placing these foreigners in Indian social order. Now, if we look at other important tribes, especially that we have during Post Mauryan Society, we find that there was an amalgamation of various tribal groups, and these tribal groups were being accommodated in the Varna order by through the process of Brahmanization. Now, coming down to the status of women in the society. If we look at again contemporary literature, it is suggested that the condition of women in Manu Smriti is almost similar as earlier times, because Manu speaks of older principles only as far as the rules and laws for women are concerned in the society. But their position degenerated day by day, and Manu quotes a very old phrase wherein he says that a wife, like the slave and son, has no right to property. Now, Milindapa and Mahabharata mention the hapless position of miserable condition of women in the society. Another contemporary writer, Patanjali, in his Mahabhasya, he in fact projects a more harsh position of women in the society, wherein Patanjali says that a dasi, that is a maid servant, and vrisali, that is a Sudra women, were meant for the pleasure of men of the upper classes. Now, if we look at contemporary law books again, we find that the marriage age of women was reduced as compared to earlier times. Marriage age, if we look at Vedic literature, during Rigvedic times it was 15 or 16. During this period, there is further reduction in the age of marriage for women, and in fact some lawgivers suggest that women should be married pre-puberty. So it is a very important shift that adversely affected the position of women in the society. Then there was no inheritance right for women in the society, but however, Manu mentions for the first time that a widow, a sonless widow, had the right to inherit the property of her husband. If the husband of a woman dies, and if the woman does not have sons, in that case she can inherit the property of her husband. Now, this is a very important shift as far as the property right of women is concerned. However, there is contradictory evidence as far as property right of women are concerned, because on the one hand, Manu denies any type of property right. Then he said a sonless widow can inherit. But if we look elsewhere in the literature or elsewhere in the society, we find that there were certain instances in which women could perform sacrifices either on either alone or with their husbands or with their sons. The women could perform Vedic sacrifices, the women could donate to sanghas, Buddhist sanghas and Jaina sanghas. So what we find that on the one hand, Manu suggests a position of complete dependence of women on the men, because he says that a woman prior to her marriage should be under the control of her father, after her marriage she should be under the control of her husband, and after the death of her husband she should be under the control of his son. So in this way Manu is suggesting a position of dependence for women. But on the other hand, Manu also provides the right to Stridhan to women. That is, anything that is gifted by the parents of a woman at the time of her marriage is called Stridhan, and it generally passed on to her sons and daughters after her death. But it was her own property that she could spend it as per her own sweet will. So this is again very contradictory situation, that on one hand she is dependent, or in other words she is being treated as a property, first of father, then of husband and then of son, and on the other hand she is also given some property rights. So this contradictory situation of contemporary literature as far as position of women is concerned is very striking. And of course there were certain changes in later times, but during this time the position of women does not seem to be very comfortable. Now moving on from society to contemporary religion, contemporary religion mostly consisted of Brahminical religion and Buddhist and Jaina. Now here we shall focus on Brahmanism and the changes taking place within Brahmanism and in Buddhism. Now if we look at contemporary literature again, we find that Brahmanism was receiving support from several kings. We have Satvahana rulers, we have certain rulers belonging to foreign dynasty. They were supporting Brahmanism by performing Ashwamedh sacrifices. For example, Sunga king is said to have performed Ashwamedh, Satvahana king is also said to have performed Ashwamedh. So in such a situation they were promoting, rather they were supporting Brahmanism, and in light of changes that had already taken place in the sphere of religion during previous centuries, we find that Brahmanism also acquired new features, and it was gradually crystallizing into the Puranic Hinduism as we call it today. Now the central feature of Brahmanism that we have during this period is worship of gods and goddesses and not sacrifices, because earlier the Vedic religion was sacrificial religion. Now during post Mauryan times we find that now there is less emphasis on sacrifices, there is less emphasis on ritualism and more emphasis on worship of gods and goddesses, that is towards bhakti or devotion as we call it. Now the idea of supreme deity also gains a strength at this point of time, and two supreme deities that emerged in the sphere of Brahmanism were Vishnu and Shiva. Now division of religious pantheon, the Brahminical religious pantheon, especially in these two groups, led to development of Vaishnavism on one hand and Shaivism on other hand. But at the same time we also have the concept of trinity of gods, wherein Brahma became the creator god, Vishnu became the protector god, and Shiva was the destroyer god. Now as far as the cult of Brahma is concerned, it did not become much popular in Indian society, but Vaishnavism and Shaivism were very popular, and they spread almost all over the country over a period of time. So the characteristic changes in Brahmanism that we find during post-modern times as compared to earlier times is first that there is a shift to bhakti from sacrifices or ritualism, and at the same time there is assimilation of local tradition in Brahmanism. Now, this can be seen especially in the light of assimilation of Narayan, Balaram, Krishna, Bhagavat cult within Vaishnavism. But let us first discuss Shaivism, or the basic features of Shaivism as we can mention here. Now, as far as origin of Shaivism is concerned, the origin is traced to pre-Vedic times, because even during Harappan times, one seal has been recovered that is called the Proto-Shiva seal, and people try to locate the origin of Shaivism during pre-Vedic times or Harappan times only. But by post-Mauryan times, Shaivism became a very popular sect in India. Now, as we all know, the principal deity of this sect was Shiva, who was worshipped in linga as well as human form. Now, Shaivism received royal support because we have Vema, the successor of the founder of Kusana dynasty, Vema Cadphises. On the obverse of some coins of Vema, there is a trident, and it is believed that probably Vema was a follower of Shiva. Now, even on the coins of Kanishka, though Kanishka was a Buddhist himself, but even on certain coins of Kanishka, we find symbols related to Shaivism. So, we can say that the rulers were patronizing Shaivism also. Now, if you look at Gatha Saptasati is a text that was written by one of the Satavahana kings, Hala. Even in Gatha Saptasati, there is reference of Shiva. So, by the post-Mauryan times, Shiva as a deity had become popular in North India as well as in Deccan and also in South India, because Sangam literature also indicates towards this only. Now, Shiva was not worshipped alone, or the pantheon of Shiva concentrated around a number of deities, a number of other deities who were also worshipped along with Shiva. This included Parvati. Parvati was consort of Shiva, and she is also considered to be Shakti because all the energy emanates from her. In Satavahana literature, she is known as Gauri. Now, Parvati along with her two sons, Skand and Ganesh, consisted this Shiva pantheon. Skand is again younger son of Shiva, who was the head of the army of the gods, he was the general of the army of the gods, who is also known as Kartikeya or Kumar in some areas, whereas Ganesh, the elder son of Shiva, was in fact head of the Ganas or the followers of Shiva. So these deities were also worshipped along with Shiva, but the main deity of this pantheon, needless to say, was Shiva, who was worshipped in various forms. Now, in Shaivism, we also have emergence of a number of pantheons, number of sects. Now, the sect that emerged during post-Mauryan times is the sect of Pasupata sect that was established by a person called Lakulis in the area of Gujarat sometimes around 2nd century AD, and in this Pasupata sect, Shiva was worshipped in the form of Pasupati. Now, there were other sects also, but they emerged at a later period and not during post-Mauryan times. Now, Vaishnavism was in fact another religion of contemporary, another Brahminical religion rather of contemporary times was Vaishnavism, and it was a very popular sect of Brahmanism because its popular deity was Vishnu, and Vishnu was more popular. If we look at contemporary literature, Vishnu seems to be more popular than Shiva. So the most popular deity of Vaishnavism was Vishnu, and cult of Vishnu is basically known as Bhagavatism in early period, which developed from Vedic cult of Vasudeva and Krishna. Now Vaishnavism owes its origin to Upanishads, because in Upanishads we have philosophical thoughts seen for the first time in ancient Indian literature, and this is associated with devotion or bhakti, because the ritual cult was gradually becoming unpopular, and Upanishads gave this idea of devotion or bhaktism. Now this cult, as we find in our literature, first originated around the region of Mathura, and in this cult the devotion to Vishnu was considered to be the most supreme virtue. Now what you find that around 2nd century BC, Vishnu and Narayan were unified and identified as one deity. Now this idea of amalgamation helped Brahmanism to check Buddhism on the one hand and popularity of Vaishnavism on the other. And popularity of Vaishnavism was associated with the popularity of Brahmanism. So this was a very important tool used by Brahmanism to check the popularity of Buddhism and increase the popularity of Brahmanism and also the clientele of Brahmanism. Now it's not only that the Brahmanas were promoting it, but in fact Brahmanism was also getting some royal patronage, though we have not much references of royal patronage, but other ancillary evidence suggests towards royal patronage of Buddhism during post Mauryan times. Here during post Mauryan times we have the famous Garud pillar that was erected by Heliodorus, the ambassador of Indo-Greek ruler Antiochus, who came to the court of Bhagabhadra somewhere in Vidisha near Bhopal, and he erected that famous Garud pillar and professed to Vaishnavism. Now another idea associated with Vaishnavism was the concept of avatar, or thus 10 incarnations of Vishnu. Various incarnations of Vishnu were popularized, of which Ram and Krishna became more popular, but Narsimha and Barah were also popular, and through the idea of Avatar-Bad, Vaishnavism tried to include local features, local traditions, and extended its support base. Now apart from worship of Vishnu, we have also evidence of worship of other emblems associated with Vishnu. For example, the Garud, that is the Vahan or the vehicle of Vishnu, is also worshipped. The Chakra of Vishnu is also worshipped in some places. Chakra, that is the weapon that he carries, it is also worshipped. Now his consort Lakshmi, she is also worshipped in this pantheon. So this idea of Vaishnavism becomes more popular, and it was a pan-Indian phenomenon. Throughout the country we have evidence of worship of Vishnu. Because of assimilation of local features, it becomes more popular. Now Vaishnava religious ideas are also found in Ramayana and Mahabharata, and Bhagavad Gita, which was in fact included in Mahabharata sometime say around 2nd century, was also very helpful in popularizing Vaishnavism. Now another important development in the field of religion during post-Mauryan times was taking place in Buddhism, and in Buddhism we especially find the emergence and development of Mahayan Buddhism. Now, Mahayan Buddhism originated sometimes around 1st century BC in Andhra region, and it became more popular from the times of Kanishka, especially after its formal division at the 4th council, because Kanishka organized the 4th Buddhist council, and it was at this council that there was the formal schism in Buddhism in Hinayan and Mahayan. Hinayan as it's known as lesser vehicle, and Mahayan as it's known as greater vehicle. Basically, Hinayan was the group of followers who believed in the teachings of the Buddha. They were the traditional Buddhists, they were orthodox Buddhists, whereas Mahayan were progressive Buddhists. They thought that there was need to change with the times according to changing circumstances, whereas Hinayanists believe in status quo. So this was the basic difference, and that led to schism in Buddhism, and this schism takes place in 4th Buddhist Council that was organized by Kanishka. Now after this, Mahayan Buddhism spread all over North India in 1st and 2nd century AD, and it started gaining popularity, especially with the advent of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna, who was the most important exponent of the philosophy of Mahayan, who was also the propounder of the philosophy of Sunyavad, or the voidness. Now, Mahayan idea, it's not that it started only after the schism in Buddhism and after the coming of Nagarjuna, but ideas were first in fact preached by a small Buddhist sect called Mahasangik, and the teaching of this sect was, and it was a very important deviation from orthodox Buddhism, the teaching was that every being could aspire to Buddhahood and could attain it through various stages as Bodhisattva. It was also suggested that one could become a Bodhisattva by performing the acts of parimitas that was prescribed in Buddhist religion. Now, if we look at other features of Mahayan Buddhism, we find that there was belief in sunyata or void or non-reality of objects. They believed in mantras or hymns, because they used mantras while worshipping Buddha. They believed in idol worshipping. They also believed in worshipping of gods and goddesses. So these important changes that we find during Post Mauryan times in Buddhism, and especially in Mahayan Buddhism, was especially in tune with the changing socio-economic and political order. As we have already seen, there was a flux in the political setup. The political order was not constant, it was not fixed, it was not pan-Indian. Political system was in a state of flux, but at the same time the economy was growing, and this growing economy was leading to prosperity of the people, that is reflected in contemporary use, rather contemporary wide use of money economy, and this is again reflected in religion, because in the society there emerged a number of groups who had different aspirations, who had various aspirations, and probably the existing religion was not fulfilling those aspirations. So new religions emerged, or already existing religions changed themselves according to the needs of the people, and thus it led to a different kind of socio-religious setup. Thank you.
So, well friends, in today's lecture we try to understand the society and religion and how these were connected. I came to know, so I think this lecture helped you to understand the society and religion, and will also give a kind of direction how to look at the society and religion of the time. So with this word we conclude the lecture, and I thank all of you for watching the lecture. And on behalf I thank Dr. O.P. Singh for giving such a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.